Yo, what's up guys, it's your boy Scowly here, coming at you with another video. Before I get into it, I want to let you know this video is... Sorry, I couldn't contain the cringe. Anyway, welcome to part 8 of Daredevil, a masterpiece. I'm not going to waste your time any further, let's just jump into it. The episode opens with ya boy Big Willy Fisk, established now as the antagonist of the series. He's dreaming in bed about something, and he wakes up sweating. He sits up and stares at a wall next to his bed. Keep this in mind. He gets up and shows us his morning routine. He makes an omelette that actually looks really delicious, but also shows us how meticulous he plans things, even on his own. He very particularly sprinkles this green stuff on the omelette and goes to get dressed. All the shirts look the same to us, but as Fisk has been shown as a meticulous and thoughtful car door enthusiast, there's probably something about this particular shirt that stuck out. We just don't know what it is. He takes out the cufflinks as well. The music has a noticeable change when they appear, suddenly becoming a lot eerier and more serious compared to the more whimsical strings of the previous scene. He puts on his jacket, seemingly fairly normal, but when he looks in the mirror to see how he looks, he is greeted by a young boy covered in blood. The music spikes too, to enunciate the horror, but Fisk doesn't look shocked. In fact, he looks sad, mournful. The boy is him, his true self, really. Yes, this intro is phenomenal as it demonstrates that the focal point will be Fisk for the episode. It shows his morning routine, and due to the fact he doesn't seem surprised at the sight of the bloodied mirror boy, we can assume that this is a typical morning. He's careful, thoughtful, and deliberate in making his omelette and selecting his attire, but the one thing that sticks out like a severed thumb doesn't even shock him. As we know, Fisk is a little messed up, but we don't know exactly why. Now we have a little, or rather big hint, as to that why. After the usual red and moody opening, we are shown Matt's apartment, still destroyed after his tussle with Stick in the prior episode. Once again, consequences are shown to be consistent. Would have been easy for the writers to just have the apartment look tidy and normal, and it would also make some sense. But nope, Matt has just left the mess and gone to bed because his face is still freshly bloodied. This scene mirrors the opening episode in that Matt sits up, obviously in pain by the previous night's escapades. He's pained here, but probably more emotionally than physically, as we see the bracelet he made for Stick is still on his kitchen worktop. He pauses before he leaves the apartment, still considering the night. Both Fisk and Matt are considering significant moments from their childhoods, both reflecting defining moments for them. For Matt, this bracelet reflects the moment when he revealed his heart and longing for an emotional attachment to Stick, as small as the gesture was. Fisk's moment is defining too, but in a more twisted way, of course. We're then with Foggy and Karen, who are discussing their events of the night, those events being beating up assailants with a baseball and a bat. A lot of reflecting going on already, and we're less than 10 minutes in. Friendly bantering again, natural dialogue to reflect on the last episode while being true to character. Matt interrupts their conversation, intrigued as to what it is they're talking about. Foggy once again comments that Matt's abilities are strangely attuned. Like a bat, he says. Matt prods more, Foggy shakes his head to indicate that she shouldn't say anything. Once again a smart move considering they think Matt can't see them or doesn't know what they're doing physically. And so Karen caves and tells him. This starts a conversation where Matt chastises them for keeping him in the dark. Badoomts. And also for doing what they're doing, as it is dangerous and breaches the legal contract that Karen signed some episodes ago. So now we have Matt involved with their activities, who is also critical of them. This may appear hypocritical, but we've seen Matt doesn't want them to get hurt, despite the fact that Stick warned him about attachments because of this very thing. Karen even admits she's scared. Matt reluctantly suggests that they continue together, but within the confines of the law. They talk about getting in touch with Ben Urich, and Matt again seems hesitant. This may be because he knows that the Fisk Empire runs deep, and so he may have someone working at the Bulletin, someone who could overhear this and perhaps strike out on Fisk's behalf. But when Karen suggests the legal system isn't a heroic venture, Matt snaps at her and says he doesn't want anyone to be a hero. They don't have a choice. They will do it this way or they won't do it at all. He then admits he's making it up as he goes along, which is evident given his activities. He's only recently found out there's a guy at the top of this chain, and he hasn't exactly been forthright with his planning, considering his near capture by the corrupt cops when he was beating Vladimir. So Matt is now brought into the fold where Karen, Foggy, and Ben operated. He chastises them for being untruthful. Wonder if this will come up again, but against him. It is somewhat hypocritical considering Matt's activities, but consider the whole picture. He's done his best to keep his vigilante life and law stuff separate, or at least unaffecting each other negatively, and he's seen what can happen should the baddies find someone who knows him as the vigilante. It's reasonable for him to be stringent about this despite it also being a bit contradictory. Moving on back to Fisk, he is in conversation with Nobu, in a place that we will come to know soon enough. Nobu is angry, and when Wesley translates his words into a cleaner format, Nobu clarifies exactly what he says directly to Fisk. They discuss the black sky that Stick dealt with in the prior episode. Fisk ensured that there would be no police interference, and that clause didn't extend to no vigilantes, so his end of the bargain was upheld. Nobu speaks Japanese before walking away, and Wesley doesn't even need to translate. The tension is boiling in Fisk's empire between the main pillars, and it's clear this is coming to a head, with the elimination of the Russians still leaving a fresh wound. Fisk tells Wesley Nobu and his group are a necessary evil, bold claim coming from him to consider something else evil. Wesley says he doesn't like the way Nobu talks to Fisk. They're genuinely close, Wesley and Fisk, together. Everyone needs a Wesley, to be honest. It's probably why Nobu's so highly strung. He just doesn't have a Wesley. The colour palette changes and the appearance of the streets alter as well as the music now. The cars look old. This is a flashback. We're in an apartment and we see a man putting together some signs. Looks to be for a political campaign. His boy, his son, is helping him, and his wife is sitting at the table looking stressed out. In the ensuing dialogue, there's some differences in philosophy, in that it seems there's the dad's philosophy and everyone else is wrong or stupid. And it seems like the kid is stuck in the middle. Wilson in the middle. Yes, it's Wilson, because it's the boy in the mirror from the beginning. Just a little less bloody. The dad is overbearing, aggressively so. When he asks the boy anything, he just agrees with a look of fear. He even has to call his dad Sir. Definitely not a kink thing. The surname Fisk is visible on the posters. This confirms that this is a flashback and the boy is Wilson, because it's the same kid from the mirror. Mama Fisk is looking at some overdue bills. Clearly frustrated. Bill basically breaks down his philosophy. The city is everything, it's right there. All you got to do is put your mind to it and make it happen. Make what happen isn't exactly clear, but that's likely intentional since, if I'm gonna jump to conclusions, Bill Fisk is all mouth and no trousers. He has a mouth and something of a philosophy, but no real way to back it up. He offers Wilson some beer, which his mum objects to, but when Wilson drinks it and spits it out, Bill says it's funny. His wife inquires as to where the payment for all this campaign will come from. Bill says that Rigoletto gave him money. Rigoletto is a name we heard from episode 1, when Wesley says he has retired. We find out a few episodes later that he's actually dead, presumably by adult Wilson. Bill says that in order to make it, you got to put yourself out there, and Wilson backs him up, after which he takes another opportunity to dig at his wife. Truly an alpha Chad. Bill then goes back to making the signs, foreshadowing his own fate with this shot right here. Throughout this scene, Fisk's mum's arms are bruised. This is another example of show and don't tell. It's expanded upon soon, but if one were to notice them and put two and two together considering how overbearing and aggressive Bill seems to be, it's probably quite obvious why the bruises are there. We cut back to grown-up Wilson on the phone to Vanessa. He mentions in passing that he spent time abroad in Asia before switching over to another call. Wesley. He tells Fisk that Blake is awake. Right. Wesley says he's unable to speak, but since he was shot on Fisk's orders, when he does speak, he will likely be talkative against them should he recover soon. Fisk orders him taken care of, but there's a guard on the door to prevent the vigilante from coming to finish him. This is because the shootings were blamed on the vigilante from the Siege episode. After some more details are mentioned, such as 2 of the floor detail being on Fisk's payroll, he suggests using Blake's partner Hoffman to do it. Wesley reasonably says this would be difficult because they have been friends for years, so Fisk suggests a personal touch. This scene is well done. Now you might be thinking, of course you'd say that, Scowl, you'd praise this damn show if it dropped your pants and gave you a blindingly good time. But just let me demonstrate. The scene advances the overall story because a loose end left from a few episodes ago is now addressed. This pushes the story along because it means the main characters must deal with it in order to move forward with their plans, or at least not recede in them. But it is also a good demonstration of Fisk's character. quite easily moving between his peaceful and gentle conversation with Vanessa and a scary, on-point conversation about removing a man from the equation so he doesn't pose a threat to the overall business. He goes through several avenues of how to do it, such as using the usual methods of trying to simply dispatch him, before turning to a more emotionally attached method of using Blake's best friend to perform the act. A mentally and psychologically attuned man, as long as no car doors are involved. So not only is this a story-driven scene, it also enhances Fisk's character even more. So yes, it's very well constructed. We continue on to the office of Nelson and Murdoch, where they discuss how tedious their current activities are. Character-oriented dialogue again until Matt points out that Confederated Global Investments, the guys who hired Nelson and Murdoch to defend Healy after his bowling ball accident, have a subsidiary called Westmeyer Holt Contracting, who have several complaints against them for the same operations done in Mrs. Cardenas' apartment. Karen suggests Tully, Mrs. Cardenas' landlord, might know something, but this is interrupted when the bulletin reports that Blake is awake. Badooms. Foggy says he didn't deserve to be shot by the vigilante. Karen says that this is not confirmed, but it would be interesting to hear what Blake has to say. Matt agrees, and it's quite obvious where this is going. Now, both protagonist and antagonist are on the same path, but with a different goal. The scene is cut short and we are back with Fisk. He's the focal point of the episode, so this makes sense. He's with Hoffman, who, as predicted, is not enthused about the idea of Blake having to die. He even points out that it was under Fisk's orders that he was shot. Fisk basically breaks down the chain of events that led to this conversation. Blake was not entirely focused on maintaining silence, but Hoffman counters that the vigilante roughed him up. Fisk says that's fair, but what was not forgivable was that Blake didn't tell anyone that the addresses of the Russian bombings was found by the vigilante, who was then told them by Claire before she left Matt alone. Fisk states that Blake is directly responsible for the vigilante knowing so much, which totally brutally logically does make some sense. Blake was stupid when he didn't alert anyone to the phone going missing, but given that he would have been killed or fired, that's a reasonable thing to hide to an extent. Overall, Blake is screwed either way. If he did tell them he lost the phone, then he's likely to be killed immediately, or if he doesn't tell them, then the situation plays out as it does in the show. Regardless, Hoffman says he's known Blake for over 30 years. Fisk moves in close and asks how much those years are worth individually, rounded up. Essentially a polite way of telling Hoffman to name his price. Fisk broke down the entire ugly situation to prove it's Blake's fault. He and Hoffman are both at risk if he says anything, and Fisk is willing to pay Hoffman anything he wants to do the deed. It's a messy situation. Messier than the back of Ferdinand's limo in 1914, and it's about to get a whole lot messier as Hoffman enters the hospital. He looks quite remorseful. He signs in, and the cop on the door, it's Officer Brent, who we've seen before, a seemingly good cop, checks his bag. It's a meatball sandwich, seemingly nothing else, and so he's allowed to go in. I'm going to assume that it's because how close Blake and Hoffman are, that's quite well known. Hoffman wouldn't be suspected to be doing anything malicious. This is based on my knowledge of the world and characters with a hint of reasonable assumption. Of course, Hoffman enters, and when he pulls the sandwich out, it's revealed that there's a syringe in it. So he agreed to kill Blake. He says, "I'm sorry," before injecting it into Blake's drip cord. Not much of a leap to guess that this is some form of poison. I don't think Hoffman would want to inject liquidized Viagra. I'm not sure that's part of their relationship. Blake wakes up, and Hoffman looks frightened as if he just realized what he did was a scummy move, before he's knocked out by the vigilante. Scared, Blake attempts to get up, but he's obviously slowed by his injuries, not to mention whatever he's been injected with. The vigilante blocks the door with a chair and goes to Blake. He quite bluntly explains that whatever he was injected with has already reached his heart and he is going to die. But before he goes, he has a chance to make Fisk pay for it by telling the vigilante everything he knows. The increased beeping on the heart monitor alerts the cops outside who attempt to break into the room. They eventually do, only to find Blake dead, Hoffman unconscious, and the window open, which presumably the vigilante entered and left through. This cat and mouse play between Fisk and the vigilante has claimed another victim, and another name has been added to the vigilante's growing list of casualties, not to mention enemies. The scene also makes Hoffman a little more complex. It's clear he doesn't really want to do this, but it's either Blake dies and hopefully nothing else happens, or Blake is alive but Hoffman and a bunch of his crooked cop compatriots get the can. Of course, still a scumbag move by Hoffman, but given the entire situation, what else was he gonna do? Stick to his principles? He's a crooked cop who threw those out the second he took a little extra to his pocket. This entire situation plays out fairly realistically from the details I just addressed. Even the poison. The vigilante knows Blake will be dead soon because he can sense whatever has touched his heart, and he blocks the door immediately after knocking out Hoffman. There's also no point in sugarcoating the situation to Blake. The vigilante needs the information before Blake dies. Once again, no niceties or trying to make it more comfortable for Blake. He's just gonna die, but the vigilante can hopefully end Fisk with Blake's help. A decent story development with Blake's death, and also a continuation of consistent character traits for the vigilante. He's a meanie. And this scene is a win. Continuing on, we are back with Frisky Fisk and Leland, who mentions the bruise on his face from his interaction with the devil last episode. He talks about his son and how he told him to stay away from the city, despite the fact that he doesn't know how much more often he's going to be able to see him. Another nice little bit of foreshadowing, casually thrown in there. They're in a different location too, it looks like a garage. Leland is being measured for something, a jacket. Fisk says it will keep him safe. I wonder if that extends to elevator shafts. The other dude, the tailor, is dismissed. His last name is Potter. Fans of the comics get a hint of this character with that last name. Leland expresses concern due to the fact that the vigilante knows who he is and his connection to Fisk, who says he will provide additional security. Leland scoffs at this and says that if he were to go, in some way, a lot of Fisk's funds will go as well. Wesley enters and says it has been taken care of, but there was a wrinkle. Leland addresses the obvious, and Fisk's eyes just say, I am so going to kill this little twerp. Oh, sorry. I am so going to kill this little twerp. Wesley explains the situation with Blake and says Hoffman spun it to make it seem as though he was assaulted by the vigilante who then finished off Blake, thereby keeping Fisk's cover intact. So, Hoffman truly is a scumfuck. Nice. Leland tells Fisk he is no longer in control of the situation, and so the tension continues to escalate between the pillars of Fisk's empire. This scene is basically an introduction as to where Fisk gets his armoured suit from, and also to highlight the growing instability from another facet of Fisk's operations. Once again, doing multiple things both story, universe, and character driven in one singular scene. Win! Flashing back to young Wilson. His mother is comforting him. He's got a cut on his lip and he is in tears. His mother actually seems to care for him in an immediate sense. From the last scene, Bill seems to care about Wilson's future while disregarding his present self, whereas his mother actually cares about him at the moment. Wilson asks if it's true whatever they said, and his mum doesn't really answer, and instead tells Wilson to just block out the haters. It's interesting that she chooses not to answer considering what was said. Bill then enters the scene and immediately there's tension because he calls Wilson fat and is aggressive towards his wife. Truly, Dad of the Year. Wilson says a boy down the street was knocking down Bill's signs, and when Wilson confronted him, he hit him and said he and his dad were losers. Interesting that Mother Fisk didn't actually answer the question as to whether Wilson thought it was true or not. She just said, ignore it. She probably agrees, but out of sympathy just sidetracked the question to focus on Wilson's well-being. A decent parent. Shame about the other one. Bill tells Wilson to get his coat and to come with him. They find the kid who was doing the dastardly deed to Dad, and after a short but tense exchange, Bill, shockingly, gets aggressive. This comes after the kid turns to run, but as he's holding a baseball bat over his shoulder, the butt of it smacks Bill in the chin. Not sure if this is accidental, but it sure seems to be, plus Bill put his hand on the kid first, so he's the one to escalate the situation. So even if it was intentional, the kid isn't in the wrong. He swings the bat at Bill, but Bill knocks him down and disarms him, hitting him with the bat and telling him to say something funny, to the cries of Wilson telling him to stop. Before the altercation, the kid admitted he was repeating what his own father said about Bill. This is important for my conclusion later. Bill brings Wilson in and tells him that it's people like this that don't want him to win. They want him to be afraid, to not put himself out there, and that it's Wilson's responsibility to ensure that they don't do this. It seems by force. He tells Wilson to kick the boy. Wilson clearly doesn't want to, but naturally Bill insists. Wilson starts kicking the boy while his dad tells him to continue and do it harder. No nice words here, this is fucking harrowing. Not only did Bill beat down what is essentially a kid, but he forces Wilson to kick the boy while he's down, and eggs him on to do it. No friggin' wonder this kid's a little strange as an adult, but the best is yet to come. Wilson awakes, in a similar way to the start of the episode, with a hard cut. He was dreaming again, this time about this specific engagement, with Leland's words about not being in control cutting deep. It's a little surprise he's dreaming about a time that his dad told him to beat a guy who Bill told him was out there to keep him afraid. He sits up and stares at the wall. Fisk's morning continues as we have seen before it is interrupted by Wesley telling him that Madame Gao would like a word. and is on her way to Fisk's. Wesley is already on his way to operate as translator, but Gao shuts him down and says Wilson does not need a translator. This surprises Wilson, as he did not know she spoke English. She asks in Mandarin if he can speak her language, which he replies to in Mandarin that he can, and so he tells Wesley to leave after Gao orders him. She expresses concern that both Nobu and Leland are unhappy with the situation, and says that he has become sloppy due to the fact that she was able to find out where he lives. He has also become emotional, which is surprising considering the fact that Wilson seems perfectly in control of his emotions. Just ask Anatoly. Oh, wait. She equates this to how the Russians became just before they collapsed. This is a courtesy call. Basically, she's doing him a favor by telling him, get your shit together or I will deal with Nobu and Leland myself. Gao leaves, and Wilson wonders what was on the underside of his table before flipping it over to confirm. Strong lad. It is veggies. Wesley enters and Fisk orders him quite firmly to leave. I would say this is a crack in Fisk's psyche if I didn't already think that was already shattered. The House of Cards is teetering. Nobody is happy with the current situation, and it's all lying on Fisk to balance it. I'd flip a table over if some Chinese broad came and drank me tea and buggered off after telling me to sort my shit out. We flash back for the final time. After the situation with the other boy, Bill pulls a chair parallel to a wall and tells Wilson to sit there and stare at it and figure out what kind of man he wants to be. Bill tells him, as his son, he should be a king. Wilson obliges after being told to not look at Bill, but the wall. I will say, this is a very, very good portrayal of a very traumatized child. He's constantly looking to his abuser for both reassurance and what to do, utterly terrified of the consequences if he doesn't. He didn't want to drink the beer, his dad made him do it. He didn't want the other kid to get hurt, but his dad did it anyway. He didn't want to kick the boy, but his dad made him do it. He has no real will of his own. Not yet, anyway. Bill is going to leave to talk to Rigoletto, and so he's wearing a yellow shirt, which he is putting on cufflinks. The cufflinks. When his wife comes in and chastises him for dealing with criminals, he beats her, with Wilson in the room. We don't see it because Wilson doesn't see it. He just hears it. The words of his father, and the cries of his mother, and the whipping of the belt. It fades to adult Wilson, staring not at a wall, but at the city. It's nighttime, so some time has passed. Presumably he hasn't left this position all day. Wesley enters again and Fisk says that he did not want to be disturbed. If he wanted something, he would have asked. But Wesley counters and says that's not always true, as Vanessa enters the room. Wilson is immediately relieved? Probably more conflicted. Vanessa gently tells Wesley he'll be okay and that he can go. Wesley truly cares for Wilson. It's actually kind of nice, despite the whole criminal empire thing. Vanessa explains that Wesley is worried about him, and she walks directly in front of Fisk, blocking his view of the city. Fisk is clearly nervous and tries to avert his eyes, but Vanessa reminds him that he made a vow to always be honest with her, and he currently isn't upholding that vow. Wilson says he's afraid of what will happen if he tells her because, as we know, it's a heavy story. Vanessa ain't having it though and simply tells him to tell her. The flashback fades back in around the exact same time it cut away. Wilson is crying and sitting in the chair staring at the wall while the beating continues. Bill expressing his resentment at both Wilson and his wife. And this is where I'm going to make a judgment call. Bill has frequently touted his philosophy of taking the world by storm, making something of yourself if you have the guts to go and do it. He tried to, but he lost an election as was revealed when he was beating the boy. He claims that he is right and the rest of the world is wrong, or at least doesn't see it. He told Wilson that there are people out there who want to keep him afraid, and he can't allow that. But his philosophy, while admirable, doesn't hold up in his actions. When he found the kid who was bad-mouthing him, instead of going to his dad who actually said the words the kid just repeated, he beat the boy and commanded Wilson to as well. Now that his wife badmouthed him slightly, he's beating her too. And we've already seen he's quite verbally abusive to Wilson. We haven't seen him interact with anyone else, at least not anyone at his level of physical stature. These actions, combined with the fact that he's wearing a yellow shirt, a common colour associated with cowardice, I'm going to make the call based on these character actions that Bill Fisk is a coward. Might be an obvious call, but I figured it warranted some explaining. Wilson grabs a peen hammer from the making of the posters earlier and screams at his dad to stop it. Bill scoffs at this and belittles Wilson by claiming he won't do it, before turning back around to his poor wife. Wilson then strikes Bill in the back of the head, and Bill falls to the ground before Wilson starts beating his head in, screaming, "Keep kicking him," as his dad commanded him to do earlier. You can tell all the anxiety and fury from Wilson towards his dad has bubbled up and is now hemorrhaging, much like Bill's brain matter. This is the one independent choice that young Wilson has made so far, and it is a righteous if somewhat grotesque display. Bill told him that there were people out there who wanted to keep him down, keep him afraid, and it was his responsibility to not let that happen. Well, finally, Wilson is done letting it happen. Wilson's mum comes and comforts him. He looks over her shoulder to the wall that his dad told him to look at, his last command before he died. His mum then calms herself down and tells Wilson to get the saw. Here I was thinking his mum would be a little more pleasant, but nope, straight down to business. She removes his clothes and the cufflinks, handing them to Wilson. She then starts sawing. Jesus Christ. Presumably cutting him up into smaller pieces so he is easier to transport. And it flashes forward to Fisk, retelling the story to Vanessa while caressing the cufflinks quite anxiously. He explains that they carried him in bags over the course of a week to the river. Vanessa looks shaken, her breaths are shaky themselves. Fisk explains that nobody looked for him because they guessed he'd left town to avoid paying Rigoletto the money. Wilson was then sent to live with relatives on a farm. Vanessa attempts to reconcile these emotions, explaining that he was just defending his mother. But Wilson clarifies that he did it for himself, not her, and that he wears his father's cufflinks as a reminder that he is not savage without reason. He is above being brutal without good cause. He is not, as he says, a monster. But then, a smidge of the terrified and uncertain child comes through as he asks Vanessa, "Am I?" And Vanessa assures him that he isn't. This is quite a powerful scene as we finally learn the significance behind the cufflinks. Fisk wears them in remembrance, but not the way most people would. He wears them to remember the darkness that blanketed his childhood, and to never be the savage and cowardly cunt his father was. To his credit, so far Fisk has shown himself to not be a coward, as he fought and killed Anatoly face to face himself, leagues above what we saw his father do. So if for nothing else, he's not a cowardly pussy like his dad. Going on to a different track, shifting from a character story to a story-driven, story, Fisk says that his story soon won't matter as there are people trying to reveal his actions to the world, people who don't know the vision he has for the city. When asked by Vanessa, Fisk confirms he won't let that happen. And then it's raining, it's pouring, and Ben Urich isn't snoring. In fact, he's walking to his car while arguing with Ellison on the phone. He drops his keys, bad move because that usually allows the protagonist to appear without making a sound. Oh my god! The vigilante tells Ben they need to talk, and when he walks towards him, Ben shifts back nervously. He asks Ben if he believes what the media is saying, and Ben admits that he has been involved in some sketchy stuff, but he's also heard good things, likely thinking about Karen. The devil asks Ben to expose the man behind the shot cops and the bombing of Hell's Kitchen, Wilson Fisk. When Ben says he hasn't heard the name, the devil tells him that that's by design. That's why he's dangerous. He stalks the darkness, nobody knowing who he is. And Ben quite simply responds,
"They're the man in the mask."
Pointed, but also accurate to an outside perspective, and is another point of comparison between the devil and Fisk. If Ben says no, the devil will stop Fisk some other way, which Ben remarks sounds fatalistic. The devil is not a killer, but that could change. The pressure on the no-kill rule continues. Ben asks what the devil has, who then claims that all the money is funneled through Leland Owlsley, as Vladimir told him. Ben says this isn't enough to put Fisk away, but the devil replies it will at least expose Fisk in person, and the city will realise who he is, and justice would be served that way. The devil says he would bet his life that Fisk is the man at the top, and then Ben says the devil would be betting his life as well. They continue to converse off camera. This scene basically exists to introduce Ben to the devil, and to catch the audience up in case they've fallen asleep. Rance was dumped on the bulletin steps, leading to the Union Allied scandal, and the Russians were taken out and subsumed but into Fisk's empire, all involving the vigilante to some extent, which is why he's able to tell the story. All this Enterprise's money is funneled through Owlsley, who covers it using legitimate means.
A brief summary, because I trust you enough to be following the story. It's raining in the scene too, probably just to make it a little bit more visually interesting. Cutting back to Fisk, we see him waking up in a very similar manner to the introduction. He awakes from a nightmare, and he sits up to look at the wall again. His dad told him to look at that wall and decide what kind of man he wants to be. By extension of how Fisk views the cufflinks, we can assume not the kind of man he wants to be, but rather who he does not want to be. His father. And the wall again reminds him of that. He stares at it every morning to start the day as a reminder to not be his dad. And his cufflinks are carried on his person in case he forgets it at some point in the day. But this night is different. He goes to sit and look at the wall, but he stops and instead turns to his right. Vanessa's there, in his bed. He then calms down and goes back to sleep. The episode closes with a monologue by Ben Urich as he types out his story to expose Fisk. Each sentence related to the events depicted in the episode. Some claim they are not like everyone else, therefore they deserve more, while showing us Fisk. Seems his dad's philosophy of how Wilson should be a king stuck in some way. Fisk and Vanessa have breakfast together. The usual omelette with green sprinkles. If this was stock footage, it would be pleasant, but we know there's some serious darkness here. Vanessa picks out a new jacket for Wilson, this one a lighter shade, reflecting him no longer operating in the shadows but stepping out into the light as we see soon. She chooses different cufflinks for him, perhaps to reflect Wilson stepping out from the shadow that his father casts upon him by his cufflinks and the meaning they hold. Fisk gets dressed and turns to the mirror, where Vanessa stands, blocking Fisk's usual view of the blooded boy of the past. Ben continues to type his story until he notices the television. Wilson Fisk speaks out against violence and corruption, pledges aid to Hell's Kitchen. He's speaking in public to announce himself and his intentions to the world. Not his methods though, that would be criminal, especially for car door enthusiasts. His voice overtakes Ben to be the voice heard for the rest of the footage, as Ben, Matt, Foggy and Karen, and the rest of Hell's Kitchen and New York are told by Fisk himself that he is no longer operating in the shadows, afraid of the light. As a result, Ben deletes his document as it is now pointless. Fisk is now in the public eye, spinning his web in a shining light of publicity. Enraged at his efforts being compromised and now void, Matt knocks his computer off the table with a scream. You could say, in blind fury. Man, this episode. Shadows in the Glass is Fisk's episode through and through, really hammering home who he is and what he is motivated by. Every aspect that we know of Fisk's character is highlighted here. His ruthlessness with Blake, his ability to manipulate Hoffman, his closeness with Wesley, and a more gentle nature with Vanessa. Very slight gentle nature. There's also the awkward, uneasy child, knocked around by his life with his father, an abusive and cowardly beast of a man who Wilson will try his absolute damnedest to not emulate. Despite the fact that his ideology of thinking he deserves more than the average person seems to be unconsciously guiding his hand somewhat. It's only Vanessa that calms him down, but to be clear, she's not trying to elevate him up. There's this common assumption by some social justice advocates that in fiction, damaged men are always saved by a level-headed woman, and this places the responsibility of saving men onto women as a group. Vanessa, in this story, isn't there to bring Fisk out of his realm of torment. Rather, she is climbing down to try and soothe the flames. She tells him he isn't a monster, but we know that's not really true. Fisk has personally cleaved a man's head off with a car door, and operates a criminal empire that runs on drugs and human trafficking. Of course, she doesn't know a lot of these details, but she must know to some extent what he does, as evidenced when he blew up the Russians while she watched. She's not there to help Fisk by bringing him up. She's there to get him used to living in darkness. Figurative darkness, now that he has revealed himself to the city. This makes the efforts by Matt and co to this point useless because now that he has revealed himself, they can't expose him, and Fisk can control the narrative around himself. And you bet decapitated Russians are not part of that narrative. His sneakiness and manipulation in full display. Matt's anger, frankly, isn't enough. I'd have bounced out the fucking window personally. Less action in this episode, but that means that the violence that does occur is even more impactful, and hits with the force of a car door against a Russian's head. Man, I really gotta come up with a better running joke. Acting wise, everyone is solid again, Vincent D'Onofrio carrying the entire episode, frankly. But I must commend Cole Jensen, the actor who plays young Wilson. He captures the anxiety and timidness of baby Fisk incredibly well, down to the reluctance with which he moves around. and the eventual rage that consumes him when he proceeds to beat Bill's head in with the hammer. Not only did he portray it alarmingly well, but it also captures the spirit of what Fisk as a child likely would be. Maybe less confident, but nevertheless capable of some horrifically brutal acts. Less screen time with Matt and his friends, but what is there is consistent with what we have seen, and also allows them to actually do some legal stuff. It's nice to see lawyers do some lawyering. More grandly, this episode gives us a full and complex look at the villain of the story. Why is he the way that he is? Why does he have this vision for Hell's Kitchen? Why does he rub his cufflinks at every opportunity? We get all that and more in under an hour. Vincent D'Onofrio, I'm glad you're back in the MCU, but let's just hope Disney can do you justice. Because eventually, finally, now, we come to it. The simple announcement that Daredevil Season 1, Episode 8 is a masterpiece. Thanks for watching, folks. I won't keep you too long, just want to express my gratitude for hitting 300 subscribers. You're all sound as hell, and I hope I can keep this momentum up, as I have actually started writing episode 9 already. I appreciate you very much, whoever you are, and I'll see you soon. Cheers. He's done his best to keep his vigilante life and law stuff separate, or at least unaffecting each other negatively. Fuck me.